Greetings, students. I'm Dr. Sadri, your instructor for this course. And as you know, I'm going to focus on chapter 8, which is about Marxism and neo-Marxism. All right. This chapter covers a topic which is very controversial. For many Americans, the term socialism and Marxism and everything is like using a bad word, okay, or politically incorrect word. But what I wanted to tell you and by the way, I'm not a Marxist or, neo-Marxist or whatever. But as a scholar, I need to let you know that the idea was not what we as people witnessed throughout the history, but what has happened in Soviet Union and in China and some other countries that they take pride to be a socialist or communist or whatever. First of all, as you know, when we say Marxism is associated with Karl Marx, I thought your chapter did a very good job. I go over I highlight some of the factors of it I always do that to make sure that you follow me. Plus, you notice that I wrote for you quite a bit of quite a bit of, a PowerPoint over there that, it's there for your use. So it starts with, Marxism and structuralism, and I tell you why they call it structuralism. It covers Karl Marx's life. It covers Friedrich Engels' life, which the two of them, they worked together. They didn't know each other, but later on in their life, they got to know each other, and they started working together and publishing together and everything. Then they go to Marxism backstory, and in that regard, they move from scholars to what? Practitioners. Well, the very first practitioner was Lenin, is that right? And Stalin was number 2. Those two were in Russia, and they, changed obviously what was considered to be Tsarist Russia to what? Soviet Union. Then in China was Mao. And then after that, the chapter focuses on the 4 assumptions of Marxism, okay? And I would like to go over these things and cover all of that stuff. And then I come back to you and let you know what is this all about. Is that right? And what we should know, what we shouldn't be scared of. Okay, here we go. The 4 major assumptions according to Marxism structuralism. 1, human action is, dictated by economy and economics in general. 2, transnational classes are the key actors in international relations. Okay, imperialism is an inevitable, feature of capitalism. In other words, there is no escaping from that one, according to them. And last but not least, 4, peace and justice can only, come from global socialist revolution, according to, again, structuralists, not according to Dr. Sadri. I want to make sure that you're separating those things. All right. Then at the end of the chapter, they go to that variety of Marxist perspective. They start by dependency theory, which are, after, by in 1960s and 70s became very popular. World system analysis, which I'm going to tell you a little bit about this later on. Eco-socialism, focus on environment and socialism associated with that, and Gramscianism and Frankfurt School. All right. So those are the major points that your chapter concentrates on. All right. Let me say a little bit about why contribution of Marx. Marx is dead. Is that right? And Soviet Union, fell apart. And China, without falling apart in that format, changes nature. Is that right? From a communist state has become basically, state communism became state capitalism. Is that right? So you might say, wait a minute, does any impact of Marxism and structuralism exist? First of all, what do we call it structuralism? The reason they call it structuralism is because Marxist perspective doesn't focus on one individual. It focuses on the structure of the society. And it says, there's structure at work that impacts the behavior of human beings, and it can lead into conflict. And if you know it, maybe you can prevent it and bring cooperation. But there is not much of an emphasis on cooperation, very frankly. What's the structure they're talking about? They're talking about social structure. Marx basically saw, now remember who he was. Marx was a German Jew scientist, social scientist, who was born in Germany during the growth of industrialization. Okay? Germany being a what? Major industrial society. And what did he see? He saw 2 groups of people, rich, poor. he saw two groups of people. The poor are basically workers. The rich are basically the what? The people who have capital. Okay? So what he saw, and then he saw the life of the, poor labor was horrible. There were a lot of things that now we don't see anymore. Like what? Like, for example, in capitalism of that time, which was a very, very pure form of capitalism, there was no child labor law. There was no, for example, health insurance and retirement and all this existence of union and things like that. None of these things. In pure capitalism, there is not such things. Is that right? It was closer to what we call a fascist system than anything else. Is that right? Pure capitalism coming all the way from state. In this case, was private. Corporations owning this and that, and nobody could tell them what to do because, hey, these are my workers, this is my capital, this is my factory, I can do whatever I want to do. Is that right? Because there was no state social network and social, structure to help the people. Okay? So what Marx and later on Engels, they saw this is a society going into trouble. Is that right? Because if the society started becoming divided into a lot of poor people and very, very few rich people, what are we talking about? Doesn't it sound like French Revolution? What did French Revolution do? The society was divided to rich and poor, and the poor was getting more and more and more, and hungry and hungry and hungrier, and the rich was getting smaller, 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 and had more and more and more money, and more disconnected from the poor. Is that right? It's associated with Marie Antoinette, the wife of the, Louis, that they would say, oh, I've heard that people, they cannot, they don't have enough, to, get, the bread. There's not enough bread. Well, they can eat cake. See, obviously shows that this lady, as, supposedly educated and worldwide perspective she has, she didn't know anything about cooking. She doesn't know that the main ingredient of both bread and what? Cake is wheat and flour. You see what I mean? So here we go. This is a notion, okay? So Karl Marx was not trying to suggest, a dictatorship and, torture and a KGB and all those things that Soviet Union did. When Lenin and then particularly Stalin established Soviet Union, they went really far away from what Marx suggested. In fact, according to Karl Marx, so-called communism or socialism was not supposed to ever happen in Russia. Russia was too much behind, The Tsarist Russia, yes, they had some stuff, but it was not at the level of Germany. It was not at the level of France. It was not at the level of UK, So he did not ever see his revolution of the workers was going to ever happen in Russia, okay? And I'm sure he never thought it's going to ever happen in what? In China, because China was what? Even more oriented toward agrarian society and, peasants and feudals and things like that. At least, Russia had some industries, not as sophisticated as Germany, France, and UK, but it had some. So wanted to make sure that you realize that Marxism, the way all these, Soviets and, Soviets in Russia and the Soviets in, basically China, they take pride and they had always pictures of their leaders with a Karl Marx with his beard and white hair, looks like a prophet, is that right? In the background, They didn't really follow the guy. It wasn't supposed to happen in their country. It was supposed to happen in Germany, France, and UK. But you know what happened? The capitalist, leaders, they were smart. First of all, they didn't like what Marx was saying. So Germans, they kicked Marx out. He went to France. From France, they kicked him out. He went to UK. You see what I mean? So he was basically what? A professional gypsy, moving from one country to another because nobody liked his idea. But a lot of people who were listening, they thought, ooh, he's not saying something bad. Maybe we should protect the kids. Why? Because kids were workers. Kids from any age were workers. For example, in Great Britain, when they were making all these, coal mining areas, do you think they were making mines like right now that the opening is so big? No, they were making a little hole. They would put it like 7 or 8 year old little kid that can take instruction. Is that right? Not going over there, sitting over there and playing, okay? would send them over there. They would say, okay, this is cold. This is this is a very simple, hammer. You go over there, or chisel. You go over there. You see, and this is a little light. Is that right? Your candle light. You go over there. You see it. You chip it. You bring it back, or put it in this basket, and let us pick it up. Most of those kids, they died. They didn't even make it to double digit. They died of black lung disease. This is capitalism. Okay? But this is capitalism. This is pure capitalism. Pure capitalism doesn't have child labor laws. Pure capitalism doesn't have insurance, doesn't have retirement, doesn't have any of that stuff. Okay? So what happened in France, Germany, and Great Britain? They got smart. They said, you know what? You should little by little give them some things. So these people, they don't make a revolution and come and change the system and take our money and kill a lot of other people. Let them be happy with whatever they are. Labor unions, this and that. So you see, systems started changing. In other words, they became smart from what they thought is going to happen to them based on Marxist perspective. They outsmarted Marxists. You see? Now, this is a system that in Europe, when you ask them, what type of system do you have? Do you have capitalism? They say, no, we have a social welfare. Okay? In the US, God bless their heart, we cannot even use the word social welfare because anything that has socialism, communism, they say, ooh, you're communist. It's against American revolutions. It's against American values. Oh, we have to get rid of you. We have to. You know why? Because when communism revolution happened, in US also we had similar situation as Germany, France. We had, again, that type of gap, etc., etc. There was what they called, especially when World War I, ended, the communism is growing in Russia and other places. They had what they called the Red Scare. Go and read it in our history. Is that right? Red Scare. A lot of laws, they came over there. Even the Supreme Court was voting, in a way to prevent any giving more power to the government to get rid of socialism and everything, because we had really active socialist and communist parties in the U.S. Nowadays, nobody even listens to them. Is that right? But they used to. Nowadays, we have a couple of people who are super liberal, like Bernie. Is that right? And a couple of other ones that they're very, very liberal, and they say, oh, they take, as soon as they show very, very liberal perspective, they say, oh, you're communist or you're socialist. Is that right? They label them. It is what it is. But what I'm trying to tell you is what this in reality is, okay? And I'm not defending him. And of course, this doesn't mean that any of the stuff that, Lenin, Stalin did in Russia. Do you know that, not Lenin so much. He killed some people, but not as much as Stalin did, because Stalin was in power for a long time. Is that right? From 1924, basically all the way to 1953 when he died. Is that right? Do you know that, by the way, Stalin killed more Russians than Hitler killed during World War II? Here we go. And what type of person is that? Is that right? But, the Russians, they still take pride on him. And by the way, he was not even a Russian. Okay? He was actually Georgian. Not from our Georgia, their Georgia. Is that right? So he actually made Soviet Union to be an industrial country, but he did it by force. Okay? It didn't happen naturally. He did it by force, and he killed a lot of people. And anyway, then he established things like KGB and everything else. That even when the Russian Soviet Union fell apart and became Russian Federation, now they changed the name. They don't call it KGB; they call it FSB. It's the same thing. Is that right? State secret police and everything else. So, and still in Russia right now, with Mr. Putin being there, we don't see true democracy the way we see it in many Western countries and many Eastern European countries. So that is the background that I wanted you guys to have to understand the difference between what Marx really talked about, what was supposed to be, and what it didn't happen. Where he thought it's supposed to happen, it didn't happen. Where it didn't happen, because people, they learn from his experience and they made sure that the labor is happy or happier. Is that right? So the system would remain to be a stable one. But, we certainly do not, advocate what Lenin and particularly Stalin and especially Mao. Mao did even worse in China. Is that right? A lot more people. Even if he had a good, intention with his Great Leap Forward, and Cultural Revolution and everything, millions of people died, okay? There were years that people, they would not produce enough food. They didn't have food. They died of starvation in China. Is that right? So as soon as he basically got out of the stage, Deng Xiaoping came, is that right? And Deng Xiaoping had Mao was what? A very, very, how should I put it? Idealistic, revolutionary person, is that right? Deng Xiaoping, very realistic. He said, look, it doesn't matter if the cat is white or black, as long as it catches the mice. And the mice does not what? Run around the home and make everybody, sick and things like that. Because, rats and mice and everything else, they brought a lot of what? Diseases to the homes traditionally. So he had a perspective. By the time he came to the power, and everything else completely, from 1978, really, he changed China. Look at right now, China. Even though they're still celebrating the Communist Party meetings, basically act like a capitalistic country, act like a state capitalism, not, And there are some individuals, like the owner of Alibaba and a couple of other, companies that are actually very, very rich Chinese, that they have to still take order from what? From the party. But, they established it as independent companies, is that right? But it is what it is, okay? So right now, very frankly, since the Russians did not do that, we see ourselves in economic, rivalry more with China. We're not as much afraid of the Chinese military because their equipment, as of now, they're still kind of elementary. We're more concerned about the Russian equipment. Is that right? So Russians are maybe better with military equipment, but their economy is not that really complicated. The most sophisticated product they have to sell is their military equipment. The rest, what do? They export oil, they export gas. Well, this is just basically like any of the OPEC countries that they either export oil or gas. All of the, OPEC countries produce oil and gas. So in that regard, they seem more like a developing country as opposed to a developed country that is so sophisticated, has a history, used to be an empire, blah, blah, blah. Is that right? What's going to happen when oil and gas finishes? Have you thought about that? Is that right? Anyway, so I wanted to make sure that we cover that one. And then the four major assumption of, if you remember, I mentioned that one earlier, Marxism is right there. Again, of course, they foresaw, if you remember, they foresaw that there is going to be a socialistic revolution. But did the socialistic revolution really happen in Germany? And we don't know about it? Or France? Or UK? Or US? No. Because, the open system provided more opportunities for their people. All right, a couple of words about the other things that they talked about. They talk about also dependency theory, okay? Dependency theory is taking Marxism from the domestic system to the international system. Dependency theory talks about two groups of states, rich states, poor states. Poor states provide what? Commodities, simple commodities. I sell my banana to you. There is no electronics in banana. Not yet, at least not in 2023. Is that right? There's nothing electronic in there. So, or I sell my wood to you, or I sell my iron ore to you, or I sell my uranium to you, or copper to you. Is that right? You just make it, mine, you dig it, you shove it, put it in the back of a what? Truck, process it a little bit, and send it over there. Big deal. Is that right? These are, relatively speaking, much cheaper than, I received, like, look at what Japan does. Japan imports like about 90% of its oil and gas. Is that right? What do? They import oil and gas, they import, iron, they import coal. From iron and coal, they make steel. From, basically oil and gas, they make what? They make all these plastics. And what do? They produce cars. They produce electronics. You see what I mean? And each one of those equipment, each one of those Sony or Mitsubishi products, and they build things from cars all the way to jet plane. Mitsubishi company makes jet planes. Is that right? So, and they don't sit over there, the Japanese, they don't sit over there and cry, we do not have any, we don't have any natural resources. God didn't give us any, enough iron ores, or didn't give us enough coal, or we have no oil or no gas. They do something about it. Is that right? They do what the economists call value-added products. Okay? So that is what dependency theory people, they talk about. Poor countries, they export commodities, and rich countries, they do what? They export a lot of sophisticated. Now, here comes word system, theory. And word system says, no, there's not just two groups of people, there are three groups of people. That's all they do. Yeah. There is periphery, poor, semi-periphery, like middle class, and core, rich. Same situation. They say, okay, core is sucking the blood of the semi-periphery, and semi-periphery sucks the blood of what? The periphery. And sometimes also, you know, core and periphery, they suck each other, they suck each other. I mean, the core sucks the blood of the periphery too. Is that right? Now, let me give you an example to make it a bit easier. Car industry, is that right? Volkswagen company, a very respected German company. Is that right? Okay. Volkswagen wants to sell products to what? South America. If it produces in Germany with German labor, which is so expensive, how many South Americans do you think can afford it? Very few. Only the rich. What do? They go to Brazil. Over there, they put an assembly line. So the labor is what? It's not German. The labor is what? Brazilian, who's trained by German. So they use Brazil. They produce the product over there much cheaper. They sell it to the rest of what? To the rest of South America. Interesting, huh? We do the same thing. U.S., Ford Motor Company, Mexico, Guatemala. The Fords that in Guatemala they buy are not made in U.S. They're all made in what? Mexico. Same is with Chevy and others. You see? If it was with American labor, how expensive the cars are here. Is that right? Nobody else can afford it. That's what happened. That's happened the relationship between the core, semi-periphery, and what? Periphery. Let me see, what else did they talk about? Oh, they talk about eco-socialism, which I thought they did a pretty good job of describing it, so I'm not going to go and refer to that one. And they also talked about the Frankfurt School, which I thought their definition was very, very good. So I wanted to just describe the ones that they didn't do a good job, and you might not understand it, and then you don't do as well in the what? In the exam. Having said that one, we covered this material. If you have any question, you know what to do. You always email me. Have a nice one.